Thank you for selecting this workshop. I view this as an opportunity to share a little more detail that I don't include in my books or even my live stream or interviews. Today I'll be sharing with you my personal UFO encounter and what I think about it. Though another witness was present, I still see reason to suspect it was also a personal experience. First, the encounter itself. In December of 2014 at around 11:30 p.m., my kid's boyfriend came home from work and immediately alerted me and her to come outside and observe something over the house. She wasn't interested, but not expecting anything significant, I was floored when I saw what he was talking about. There in the sky over the house was indeed a UFO. I had enough presence of mind to dash back inside and grab my video camera to return to the driveway and capture the incident. What we saw was an internally illuminated object hovering stationary above the house. Here is what showed up on video. Very disappointing, as you can see. What we were looking at and seeing did not show up well at all in the video. Admittedly, the video isn't compelling. It was a video camera of the 2000 or 2001 vintage, so that was a contributing factor, but I had used that camera in my surveillance work and captured images that had earned me commendation from customers. I have since this incident learned that UFOs in some cases are thought to interfere with electronic equipment, cameras in particular. Here is my drawing of what we saw with our eyes. My calculations estimate the object to have been about 15 to 20 feet across at the base and about 7 to 10 feet tall at the center. As you can see, it appeared dome-shaped, but not defined so much from a clearly visible structure as it was defined by the shape of the illuminated portion. My guess would be that the dome defined the limits of its illuminated interior. In other words, because of the illumination and whatever this dome-shaped thing was, that's what told us the shape of the thing, not because we could actually see the substance of the dome. Apparently, some sort of transparent material was involved, maybe glass or some form of plastic substance. The illumination was twofold. The main observation was of some sort of rotating energy inside the object, and the secondary aspect was the glow emanating from it. The object maintained steady attitude and level altitude, meaning it stayed in place and there was no wobble nor any flutter or other movement caused by a breeze. Whatever shaped what we saw was firm. Something was obviously keeping this object in place. Within moments of my starting the camera, the object then proceeded to move. Again, it maintained altitude and attitude, steady and slow, a lateral movement across the sky, away from the house. As it did, it suddenly began to eject a substance for the second time, according to the other witness who had seen it dump this stuff from above the house as he arrived. This substance appeared to be molten. It was golden yellow, but white hot at its center. This molten substance dumped off the object like a liquid. It didn't eject in small drops. The stuff dumped out profusely. It poured from the side of the object, as if from a vat of hot molten steel. There was the first large dump of the substance, and then another, and finally a third and fourth of lesser volume as we watched. This substance dumped off as the object was steadily flying away. Again, no wobble nor flutter, no sign of any lack of control over this thing. Ultimately, it sailed into the cloud coverage, which was low that night, and we lost sight of it. During the encounter, I instructed the other witness to describe to me exactly what he was seeing so that I could confirm that we were seeing the same thing. He described what I was seeing. We took a look along the ground under the path by which the UFO had departed and found nothing, though there is a large pond a block away that was under a fair amount of the trajectory of the object, so it may have mostly dumped the stuff into the water. The next day, however, I found a black substance in my yard and in spots along the same path that the UFO had departed. This substance was like fluffy, burned charcoal and disintegrated almost immediately after I attempted to collect it for evidence. All we are left with is the video I shot, and that in itself is somewhat of a mystery, for as I said, what is seen in the video is not exactly what we saw with our eyes. The object as captured in the video looks like just a spot of light dropping other spots of light. This is unconvincing where the actual experience is concerned, so we are left with little more than our testimony. The questions remain. What was it? What was its source? Why didn't the video capture what we saw as we saw it? I have some ideas. First, I rule out an extraterrestrial source per se. The nature of the object as I saw it did not look like something in which there was a living crew aboard, meaning it didn't look like something that would have a crew compartment. That suggests a drone, perhaps. If I'm wrong about the dismissal of it being an ET object, I would concede that the object might have been some sort of ET reconnaissance or surveillance drone at best. But such a device could also just as easily have been an Earth-based military drone used for the same purpose. There is a former U.S. Air Force base within sight of my house, and I have long suspected it maintains some military presence, because we are well within the range of flight operations of Edwards Air Force Base and the Lancaster-Palmdale Aerospace Labs. It might have sent something off course from either one of these sources, and the ejecta could have been indicative of a malfunction of sort. If the object was neither technology of our military nor of ET, might it have been merely some sort of Chinese lantern or similar object? I did my research on that question and found that what we saw could not have been such an object. It was too big, too firm, and too controlled in its flight. Also, though a Chinese lantern upon consumption by flame resembles the description of what we saw, the ejected substance from the UFO was of far too much volume and too liquid in its composition. So what was it? My suggestion emerges from an attempt to determine from where the object came. The other witness stated that he saw the object moving over our neighborhood as he was exiting the freeway. This would be the 210 freeway in the northern direction along that stretch, and at the baseline exit on the east side of the highway. He turned eastward off the exit and proceeded home. Our house is roughly 1.25 miles from the freeway exit. He stated that the UFO appeared to have been moving from a northwestern direction, moving to the east by southeast, the cardinal direction of our house from the baseline exit. Before reaching the house, he stated that he could tell the object had stopped over our street, and upon pulling closer to home, he could see that it was right over the house, specifically above the east side fence line between our property and my neighbors to that side. The UFO was standing still in the sky in that spot above the house when the other witness ran inside to get me, seeing the first ejection of the molten substance as he did so. The rest of the encounter we witnessed together. Is there anything in that data which suggests any pertinence to my perspective on this? Yes, there is. The other witness said the object appeared to have been coming from the northwest. That meant something to me almost immediately following the incident. And that is where the encounter gets even more weird. That very day, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I had conducted a particular bit of research with another associate, the neighbor of the house on the other side of the fence line over which the UFO hovered. This requires that I share a little background on my research to that point. While investigating a mystery, which I have recounted in my Empire of the Wheel series of books, I paid a visit to a location to talk with an organizational historian. That person wasn't available, so I looked around a bit and noticed a feature that was rather interesting. It was painted on concrete and resembled a ball game court of some kind, incorporating colors, squares, a circle, and angles. I assumed it was some sort of game court due to the nature of the location, but subsequent research failed to identify its specifics with any game court. I returned to the location another time, again on a weekday during business hours, and still no one was available on site to talk with me. Again, I walked out to the painted court thing and made mental notes of my observations. There were other features of the location that were resonant with research I had done in the past on telluric current and Disneyland, interestingly enough, and those were connected to this court mandala, I'll call it, by features making the whole thing similar to a certain ancient site on the other side of the world. It was while standing in the center of this mandala court painted on the cement when I had an extraordinary experience. I saw on the face of one of the hills a few miles to the north of my position a large image of who seemed to me to be Pallas Athena, the ancient Greek goddess. I saw a head and shoulders portrait, if you will, of a woman with an ancient Greek-style helmet, powerful eyes staring at me, and she had an owl perched on her shoulder. Here is what I saw. This is a rendition from memory as best as I can illustrate. It looked to me like an image people burn into or mark upon a terrain as some sort of school mascot or a city pride project, not an actual vision of the goddess herself. Subsequent research revealed that there was not then, nor is there now, any school or organization or township with any such mascot or theme as Athena in the area of this location. Now look at this image, which I photographed a year later out in the desert. This is an example of the physical medium by which the image of Athena appeared on the hill at the other location where I stood in the center of the mandala. Imagine the image of Athena applied to the terrain of that hill in the same manner as the image you see here. I think you get the idea. When I returned to the site of this mandala image painted on cement the next day, the image of Athena was not there. It was never there again, and I have continued to visit the location many times over the past 11 years. This strange mandala, for lack of a better description, is what my associate and I went to document, and later on that very day, in December of 2014, the UFO appeared. We measured every line and dimension of the mandala. I drew a schematic identifying the colors as well as the cardinal point alignment. Intervening research between the day I saw the image on the hill and the day we measured the design and drew the schematic had resulted in 3 books over the course of a few years and revealed a major thread of symbols and lore running through the whole mystery. The thread of an ancient group of beings known as the Tuatha De Danann, who have been found amid UFO lore in the past, first by Jacques Vallée. This explained also why I saw what appeared to be Athena, as she is associated with Hecate, linked heavily to the Empire of the Wheel mystery, and who is also associated with the ancient site reflected in the layout of the particular location of this mysterious mandala. Hecate, in my opinion, after years of research and investigation, is herself likely one of the Tuatha De Danann. It is this thread which led to my hypothesis that the UFO was linked to the mandala and to the Tuatha De Danann, as it bears remarkable resemblance to one of the 4 treasures associated directly with these interesting figures who the lore tells us came from another world. This treasure is the Cauldron of Dagda. The lore says this magical object can appear as a blessing or a sign of approval and kinship from its owner, the Tuatha King. He can also use it to claim his territory. Remember, I had charted the mandala that very day the UFO appeared and hovered over my house. The other witness stated that he saw it crossing from a northwestern direction over the neighborhood until it reached our street, specifically our house. The mandala site is located to the northwest from our house. I find all this to be more than coincidence, though I admit I cannot prove these experiences to you. In my investigation into the local Empire of the Wheel mystery, I learned that this area of the valley where the mandala is located is within eyesight of a canyon known in the 1890s to be a place where the local spiritualist congregation would gather in an attempt to contact disembodied entities, and there were stories of them allegedly communicating with so-called devils. I can't vouch for the validity of those stories, but it's interesting to me, considering my experiences in the same area. Look at the object again. We saw a flat bottom with a glowing feature above, something rotating within and glowing with some sort of dynamic energy. We next saw it dumping a molten golden white substance over its side or rim as it moved again. Imagine a cauldron. The glowing part we saw could be the glow from what boils inside the cauldron, and its special contents are spilled over the side, as a serving perhaps, like a sort of spiritual manna from the gods. Now combine the idea of a cauldron and an ancient technology, like a vimana, and the concept of the mercury vortex engine. In the description of the controversially documented mercury vortex engine, we have heat, a molten liquid, rotation, illumination from the energy, and ultimately flight. What if the Tuatha treasure, symbolized as a cauldron, actually represents a mercury vortex engine of sorts? The description of how the mercury vortex engine is supposed to work involves an element that could be similar to a cauldron. Now take into account the alleged anti-gravity propulsion system Charles Delshow tells us was used by the Sonora Aero Club of the 1850s, using the rotation of a bell-shaped element, the addition of heat, and a mysterious liquid which provided lift and motive force when all combined. Was the Sonora Aero Club privy to ancient Vimana technology? Was the UFO that I and the other witness saw using this same or a similar technology? Did the investigative activity that I and my associate conducted that afternoon at the mandala, painted on the ground, activate something, thus causing the UFO to appear? The juxtaposition of the events and the details concerning the object and the site are remarkably resonant with that conclusion, but I cannot prove it to anyone. Thus, I won't proclaim our experience to have any more importance than any other similar claim of UFO-related experiences. It indeed has abundant importance to me, and I haven't even begun to share here all of the details between my discovery of the mandala and the night the UFO appeared. The preponderance of these details convince me that I am on the right path. There remains one last thing I would like to share with you, something I only realized fairly recently. Look at the shape of the UFO. Now look at this. Notice the domed top. Notice its identical shape to the UFO. The Integratron is located east-southeast of my house, the direction to which the UFO disappeared through the clouds. The Integratron's history involves a desire to rejuvenate human physiology, to extend lifespan. Is there any link between the Integratron and the UFO we saw, or the site from which I think it emerged? My research shows me very much so. My first visit to the Integratron was in late summer of 1987, and I had a very weird day out there, which time does not permit me to go into here. But I will share with you one thing. The place I was living in, back in 1987, at the time I first went to the Integratron, is across the street from the site where the mandala is painted on the ground. I was completely unaware of anything about that site back then in '87, and I had no idea about it before investigating the Empire of the Wheel mystery years later, and actually arrived at the site. I can't help but wonder what of my personal strange experiences I brought with me to that site, and how instrumental such things may have been in the manifestation of the vision of the goddess on the hill and the appearance of the UFO over my house the day I measured the mandala's dimensions. I also wonder what the location of the Integratron has to do with all of this, and to that end, I will show you another look at this image. A year after seeing the goddess image apparently burned onto the face of the hill, a year after having discussed this goddess image with other people, I visited the Integratron with a small group of friends in the ufology community. I was startled to notice something I had never noticed in all my visits there before. It was this image you see, that of some sort of face or mask. Though the image is not that of the goddess I saw, recall I explained that this is how the image of the goddess was displayed, as if incorporated into the terrain like this mask. I pointed out this face to the others, and they saw it too. Clearly, this is a photograph showing that it is there. To recap, I saw a similarly planted image on a hill miles away and 1 year prior. A UFO visits me 3 years after seeing this face on Goat Mountain near the Integratron, and 4 years after seeing the goddess on the hillside. The UFO is shaped like the dome of the Integratron and moves in the direction of it. These are the facts of the case, with my hypotheses and suggestions. You have to decide for yourself. I know what I think. I present my case to you today as an example of what works for me in trying to determine or guess at the source of a UFO. In my case, I see three possibilities, and the extraterrestrial is not one of them. My case can be explained by either something which manifested relative to activity I conducted at a site linked to some sort of interdimensional high magic, or it could have been an errant local military technology and the rest was merely an actual coincidence. Finally, I must acknowledge that it could have been a hoax, and they got me good. The preponderance of facts and details in favor of my first hypothesis continues to convince me in the direction that something manifested interdimensionally, though I could be wrong. An abundance of high strangeness, which had been going on around me and my associates for a period of 7 years at the time of the UFO sighting, tips the scales even more in favor of the possibility of my first hypothesis. The point is that I do indeed consider all the possibilities and would accept whatever the correct answer turns out to be, even if it's not what I think at present. Self-discipline is very important in trying to determine the source of a UFO. You must be able and willing to set aside your prejudices and preferences and look as objectively as humanly possible at a given case. This goes for the big picture as well as individual cases, because the answer to the UFO mystery is not going to be singular. Birds and insects share the skies, but they are not the same thing. Rain and ashes come from the sky, but neither are they the same thing from the same source. Because we or others may see something in the sky does not definitely mean it's extraterrestrial. If it seems that I am marginalizing the ET explanation in favor of others, that is not my intention. I merely point out that the ET hypothesis is overwhelmingly represented where ufology is concerned, despite an abundance of valid reasons to consider the other possibilities, yet many still do not. Personally, I would be a bit disappointed if the UFO I saw turned out to be a military drone, or especially a hoax, though I would be impressed with the hoaxer's effort. There is a spectrum of reality out there, and with it, a spectrum of sources for these mysterious things we see in the skies of our world. There's room for all possibilities. Walter Bosley's quality print-on-demand books are available only at lulu.com exclusively.